My family used my condo to secure a $1.8 million loan. My fiancé helped them do it. The first time I found out my family had put my condo up as collateral, they were celebrating the 75th anniversary of our family hotel. A bank manager called me while I was standing in my kitchen in Boston making coffee. She sounded cheerful. She even congratulated me first. Ms. Donovan, congratulations on the Seabrook financing approval. We just need one final identity confirmation from you today. I stood there holding my coffee mug. What financing? There was a short pause. The $1.8 million commercial loan for Donovan House Hospitality, your Beacon Hill condo, is listed as additional collateral. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood her. Say that again? She did, my condo. The place I had bought 12 years earlier with my own savings, my own bonus, and a mortgage I had paid every month myself. It had been pledged to secure a $1.8 million business loan. I set my coffee down. Who signed the authorization? Our system shows an electronic authorization from you. Send it to me. 10 minutes later, the documents were sitting in my inbox. My full legal name, Claire Donovan, my home address. The last 4 digits of my social security number. They had even copied the style of the signature I used when I renewed my passport 5 years earlier. Then I reached the final page. It included an attorney certification confirming that my identity and authorization had been verified. I saw the name, and the coffee mug slipped out of my hand and hit the sink. Evan Cole, my fiancé, the man I was supposed to marry in 3 months. The same man who had sat on my couch the night before, eating the pasta I made, telling me not to worry about what was happening with my family. Let them have one night, he had said. You've done enough for them already. He was talking about the hotel's anniversary celebration, because my family had not invited me. Their explanation had sounded almost reasonable. My younger brother, Liam, had just been named the new head of operations at Donovan House. The anniversary event was more than a family party. Investors were coming. Bank representatives, luxury travel journalists, people from the local chamber of commerce. My mother had told me, Claire, of course your family, but Liam needs one night where he can stand on his own. If you're there, everyone will ask you questions about the business. You have a strong personality. You've already had your success. Tonight should be about your brother? And I had actually agreed. I had even told myself she had a point, because that was what I had done my whole life. If Liam was upset, I made myself smaller. If Liam did poorly in school, I did not talk too much about my grades. If Liam made a bad financial decision, I did not ask too many questions about where the money went. If Liam finally had a chance to stand in the center of the room, then apparently I was supposed to stay out of the room entirely, but now I was staring at a loan package. They did not need me at the anniversary celebration. They just needed my condo and the financing documents. They did not need my face in the family photographs. They just needed my credit score. And the part that hurt the most was Evan, because this was not paperwork handled by some stranger. Evan was a commercial real estate attorney. He knew exactly what personal collateral meant. He knew what unauthorized consent meant, and he absolutely knew that my Beacon Hill condo was my separate property. I did not call him, not yet. My job had taught me something very important. When you already have reason to believe someone is lying to you, do not immediately tell them what you know. First, find out how much they lied about. My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 36 years old. I work in corporate restructuring in Boston. Companies usually do not call me when everything is going well. They call when the numbers stop working. A hotel group can't make payroll. A restaurant company is about to lose its credit line. A retailer is buried in inventory it cannot sell. A family business has 3 siblings fighting over control while the bank is waiting outside. That is when my team goes in. My job is to pull everything apart. Where is the cash? Where is the debt? Who is telling the truth? Who is moving money? What can be saved? What needs to be shut down? Some people think the work is cold. I don't. A crisis does not disappear because everyone agrees not to talk about it, and numbers do not magically improve because someone says, "But we're family." I grew up on the coast of Maine. My parents owned an old hotel called Donovan House, 42 rooms, white clapboard siding, a gray-blue roof, a wide porch facing the Atlantic. In July, we could barely keep up with reservations. In January, the wind hit the windows so hard it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the building. When I was a kid, I thought the hotel was romantic. I loved the old brass keys. The fireplace in the lobby, the smell of coffee and salt air in the morning. Then I grew up and learned what it took to keep an old hotel beautiful. Roof repairs, kitchen equipment, boilers, fire inspections, property taxes, insurance, winter cash flow, employee health plans. A building can look charming to guests and still eat money every day behind the scenes. I left Maine at 18 for college. My brother Liam was 5 years younger than I was. He stayed close to home. From the beginning, we had very different roles in the family. I was the easy child. That is what my parents called me. Claire gets good grades. Claire figures things out. Claire doesn't need much. Liam was the one everybody worried about. If I brought home straight A's, my father would say, "That's Claire, she's always been responsible." If Liam got a B, my mother would bake a cake. When I got my first paid internship, my mother called and asked whether I could help cover the deposit on a new boiler for the hotel. When Liam's first business failed at 25, my father said, at least he had the courage to take a risk. That was the family logic. I was capable, so I needed less. Liam struggled, so everyone should give more. At first, I honestly did not resent it. I loved my brother, and Liam was not some cartoon villain when we were younger. He picked me up from the airport when I came home. If I worked too late, he would text me and ask whether I had eaten. After a bad breakup in my late 20s, he drove nearly 2 hours to Boston just to sit with me over beer and make sure I wasn't alone. So every time he got into trouble, I told myself the same thing. Just this once. This is what family does. When he was 27, he ended up with almost $40,000 in business debt. I loaned him money. He promised to pay me back in 6 months. 3 years later, he had not even repaid half. After the pandemic hit Donovan House hard, I sent my parents another $60,000. My father said he would repay me after selling a small parcel of land near the hotel. The land was sold, the money never came back. My mother said the hotel needed it more, and I let it go. At the time, I still believed that keeping score with family was somehow ugly. I thought love meant you did not ask for receipts. I met Evan at a restructuring meeting. He represented a bank. I represented a hotel group that was drowning in debt. We disagreed in the first hour. He wanted the company to sell 2 properties immediately. I thought a forced sale would destroy value and make the bank recover less, not more. After the meeting, we ended up in the same elevator. He looked at me and said, "Are you always this hard to convince? Only when your numbers are weak?" He smiled. "So, you like my numbers?" "You should hope I do. The bank just approved my plan." He laughed. That was the beginning. Evan felt different from men I had dated before, or at least I thought he did. He never complained about how much I worked. He did not seem threatened by my income. The first time he came to my condo, he stood by the living room windows and looked around. "You bought this yourself?" "Yes." He nodded once. "That's impressive." I loved that answer. Not, "We could sell this someday and buy something bigger." Not, "Why do you need this much space?" Just, "You bought this yourself?" "Yes." That's impressive. We dated for 2 years before getting engaged. My parents loved him, my father especially. Evan understood real estate. He understood hotel financing. He understood loan structures. My father began calling him every now and then with questions about Donovan House. At first, I thought that was a good thing. The man I loved got along with my family. What could be easier? I did not realize that sometimes 2 parts of your life can become connected in ways you never agreed to. About a year before the bank called me, my father announced a major expansion plan for Donovan House. He wanted to add 12 luxury ocean view suites, build a small wedding lawn, renovate the old dock. He called the project Seabrook Expansion. The total budget was more than $3 million. The first time I reviewed the plan, I told him, "You should not do this right now." His face tightened. "Why?" "Because the hotel does not have enough cash reserves. The bank is willing to lend." "A bank being willing to lend you money does not mean borrowing it is a good idea." Liam leaned back in his chair. "That's always your problem." "What is?" "You only see risk." "Somebody has to. You don't understand this market anymore." I looked at him. "Liam, I finished restructuring a 9-property hotel group last year." "That's not the same thing." "You're right." I closed the spreadsheet. Their books were cleaner. My father slapped his hand on the table. "That's enough." Then he used the tone I had heard since childhood. "Your brother is finally serious about something. Stop tearing him down before he even gets a chance." The project did not move forward right away. I thought the issue had died. 3 months later, my mother called me crying. She said the hotel had a temporary cash shortage. Not Seabrook, just winter operations, payroll, insurance, equipment repairs. She said my father was about to sell another piece of land. They only needed 2 or 3 months. I transferred $92,000. I made the memo extremely clear. Temporary operating loan, repay upon land sale. My mother said over and over, "You saved this family." I had no idea that $92,000 was only the beginning. The morning the bank called, the first thing I did was contact the compliance officer at my own firm. I did not tell her the full family story. I simply said my personal identity may have been used without authorization in a commercial financing transaction. Then I called my own attorney. After that, I sent the bank a formal written notice. I had never authorized my Beacon Hill condo as collateral. I had never signed the document. Any further action on the loan could not rely on the assumption that I had consented. The bank immediately paused the transaction. Then I did the thing I was most afraid to do. I requested the digital audit trail. The loan documents had not been uploaded from my parents' hotel. They had not been uploaded from Liam's apartment. The file originated in Boston, from the network used by Evan's law firm. At 1 in the afternoon, I sat at my desk staring at the IP record. I did not cry. I became completely calm. I texted Evan, "Come to my place tonight." He responded right away, of course. "What happened?" I wrote, "Family stuff." He replied, "Okay." At 7, he arrived carrying my favorite Thai food and a bottle of wine. I told him to sit down. Then I placed the financing documents on the coffee table. Evan did not ask what they were. The second he saw the first page, his face changed. That told me everything I needed to know. "You knew?" He said nothing. "Evan? Claire? Let me explain. You knew." He looked at me. "Yes." For 1 second, I stopped hearing everything else. "You knew they were using my condo as collateral?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" He took a long breath. "Because you would have said no." I stared at him. "So?" "Your dad said it was temporary. The hotel gets the Seabrook financing. The renovation increases the value of the property. Then they refinance and remove your condo from the collateral. Liam already had investors interested. The risk was lower than you think." I actually laughed. "You're explaining why using my home without my permission was financially reasonable?" "I didn't say it was reasonable." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying they're family." Those 3 words made something inside me go cold. "Whose family? Claire? Answer me. Whose family?" He watched me carefully. "Yours." "Then why did you get to decide for me?" Evan rubbed his forehead. "Every conversation you have with them about money turns into a fight. Your mother called me over and over. Your father's health hasn't been good. If Liam fails with this project, they could lose the hotel. I was trying to stop you from regretting it later." I asked, "Where did my signature come from?" He stopped moving. That silence was worse than the answer. "They had an authorization you signed before." I told them they could not just reuse it. Then what happened? They created a new document, and I helped verify some of the information. And, Claire, the final page says you independently verified that I personally authorized the collateral. You knew I was in New York that day. He looked down. "You certified something you knew I did not do." I thought you would eventually agree. That was the sentence that ended us. Not the amount, not the hotel, not even the fake paperwork. The man I was supposed to marry had decided that because I might say yes later, my no in the present did not really matter. I took off my engagement ring. I placed it on the coffee table. Evan went completely still. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Don't end 3 years over a document." "This is not about one document." "Claire, I love you, I know." I nodded. "But you love a version of me you believe you're allowed to make decisions for. That is not the marriage I want." He started talking faster. "I can fix this. The money hasn't been released. I'll call the bank. I already did." He looked up. "What? This morning?" "The loan is frozen." His face changed again. "Tonight is the anniversary event. I know. All the investors are there." "I know, Claire. You should have warned your family first." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because this could destroy Liam's announcement tonight." And that was the moment I understood something almost funny. We were talking about a forged authorization. We were talking about my home. Our engagement was falling apart in front of us. And Evan's first concern was still whether Liam might be embarrassed in public. I pushed the ring toward him. Go. He stayed seated. We still have a wedding. No, we don't. You're angry. I'm calmer than I've been in 3 years. Claire, go. Eventually, he left. When the door closed, I sat on the couch and stared at the faint mark the ring had left on my finger. That was when I cried, but I only cried for about 10 minutes. Because another document from the bank arrived, I opened it. The Seabrook financing budget included $175,000 in pre-opening management and brand consulting fees. The recipient was North Tide Hospitality Consulting. I had never heard of it. I looked it up. The company had been formed less than a year earlier. Its registered owner was Liam, my brother. The business address was the apartment he rented. No employees, no website, no visible clients, but Donovan House had already paid North Tide $48,000. I immediately went back through the $92,000 I had sent my parents. $51,000 had gone where they told me it would go. Payroll, vendors, insurance, but $21,000 had been transferred to North Tide. More than $9,000 had paid Liam's overdue state taxes. Another $8,000 had covered delinquent payments on a used boat he had financed. I stared at the figures. My mother had cried while telling me the hotel might not make payroll. And part of my money really had helped employees. The rest had helped my brother keep a boat. I did not drive to Maine that night. I kept digging. I knew that if I showed up immediately, it would become a family argument. Everybody would cry. Everybody would yell. Everybody would explain. I did not need explanations yet. I needed facts. The next afternoon, Ruth called me. Ruth had worked as the hotel's accounting manager for more than 20 years. When I was a kid, I used to sit in her office after school and do homework while she closed out the day's receipts. She did not ask why I was looking into the finances. She just said, "So you finally started looking?" My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" she sighed. "Claire, there have been things for years that I didn't like. Your father always told me you knew." Knew what? Your tax documents, your income verification, and that line of credit a few years ago. I sat up straight. What line of credit? There was silence. Then Ruth said, "You should come home." That evening I drove to Maine. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell Liam. I went straight to Ruth's house. She placed an old file box on her kitchen table. 5 years earlier, Donovan House had applied for a $650,000 revolving line of credit. My father's personal assets were not strong enough. Liam's credit at the time was terrible, so the application package included my income information. I remembered that year. My mother had called me while I was at the airport and asked me to sign what she described as an updated family hotel emergency contact form. I had signed several digital pages on my phone while waiting to board. Buried in that package was an authorization allowing the bank to verify my income and assets. It did not make me directly responsible for the entire loan, but it helped the bank treat me as part of the financial support structure. I looked at Ruth. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Your dad said you agreed. Your mom said the same thing. I asked once. She told me you were busy and didn't want to be involved in the details. I had heard those phrases my whole life. Claire is busy. Claire doesn't like details. Claire doesn't want to be involved. Claire doesn't want attention." Every one of those sentences did the same job. They let my family keep using the value I provided while keeping me far enough away from the truth. The next morning, I went to Donovan House. The anniversary celebration was over. Flowers were still in the lobby. A large sign read, "75 years of Donovan Family Hospitality." Along one wall was a huge display of family photographs. My grandfather, my grandmother, my father, my mother, Liam as a child, Liam at college graduation. There was not one photograph of me. I stood there for a long time. An employee saw me and looked uncomfortable. "Claire, morning. I didn't know you were coming." Apparently nobody did. My father came out of his office. The second he saw me, his face hardened. "What did you do?" "Not, are you okay?" "Not, we need to talk." His first question was, "What did you do?" "The bank froze the loan," he said. "Investors are calling. Do you understand Seabrook might be dead now?" I looked at him. "Did you know someone forged my authorization?" His jaw tightened. My mother came rushing out behind him. "We were just borrowing it." "Borrowing what? Your asset profile?" "My condo is not an asset profile. You weren't going to lose the condo. Then why didn't you ask me? Because you would have said no. She had used the exact same words Evan had used. And suddenly I understood. They had not gone around me because they did not know what I would say. They went around me because they knew exactly what I would say. No, Liam came down the stairs. Do you really have to make this such a huge thing? I turned toward him. What is North Tide? His face froze. It's a consulting company. Whose? Mine, employees. It's still getting started. What consulting work did you do for Donovan House that was worth $48,000? Claire, answer me? He raised his voice. I'm here every day. I've given years of my life to this hotel. Isn't that worth anything? Then take a salary. Why create a separate company and pay yourself through invoices? My father jumped in. It was a tax arrangement. I looked at him. You really do not want to explain tax arrangements to me right now. He stopped talking. I pulled out a spreadsheet. My $92,000. $21,000 went to Liam's company. More than $9,000 paid his state tax debt. More than $8,000 went to his boat. My mother looked uncomfortable. The boat could have been used for hotel guests. It's sitting at a private marina. Liam uses it on weekends with his friends. Those are hotel guests? Liam finally exploded. What do you want? You want us all to kneel down and thank you? You just want everybody to know you're the successful one. That made me go quiet. Why wasn't I in the anniversary photos? Nobody answered. I asked again. Why wasn't I invited? My mother was the first to speak, because the investors needed to believe Liam was independently leading the hotel. Finally, the truth. Not that I was too busy, not that I hated attention, not that I chose to stay in Boston. They needed me absent because my presence made the story less convincing. If I stood in that hotel, investors might ask who had structured certain bank relationships, who had covered the winter cash shortage, why Evan had been helping with legal documents, why the new independent leader still seemed to depend on his sister whenever something serious went wrong. Liam stared at the floor. They've compared us our whole lives. Who? Everybody. Claire's in Boston. Claire did this. Claire makes that much. Claire fixed this. I've been here for 12 years, but whenever something actually goes wrong, people still ask what you think. So you removed me? I wanted one night where I wasn't standing behind you. I looked at him for a long time. You can stand in front of me. I don't care. But you don't get to stand on my credit. He said nothing. Then Evan walked into the lobby. I was not surprised. My father had obviously called him. Evan looked like he had not slept. Claire, can we talk privately? No. This isn't the place. This is exactly the place. My father immediately said, You two should not let us affect your wedding. I turned toward him. What wedding? Everyone went quiet. My mother blinked. What do you mean? I looked at Evan. You didn't tell them? His face turned pale. Liam understood first. You broke up? Yes. My mother almost shouted, Claire, what? Are you insane? Evan was only trying to help us. I laughed. Do all of you really think the phrase helping the family gives you permission to do anything you want? Nobody answered. I turned to Evan. Tell them. He stayed silent. Tell them how the financing package got legal confirmation. My father's expression changed. Evan finally said, I verified Claire's identity information. No, I cut him off. You verified that I personally authorized the collateral. He looked at the floor. Yes, my mother said softly. But you two were about to get married. I looked at her. So after marriage I don't need to consent anymore? That is not what I meant, but all of you are doing the same thing. Dad thinks I'm his daughter so he can use my financial history. Liam thinks I'm his sister, so I'm supposed to fix his problems. Evan thought I was his future wife so he could decide what I would eventually agree to. I paused. In this family, love always seems to mean you get more access to me. No one spoke. I took a folder from my bag. It was not a police report. It was not a lawsuit. It was a formal notice. Effective immediately. I withdrew all personal financial support from Donovan House. Nobody was permitted to use my income, credit profile, property, employment, or professional background in any financing package. My parents had 30 days to produce all financial records involving my identity from the previous 10 years. My $92,000 advance was now documented as a formal debt. All money paid to North Tide would be reviewed by an independent accountant, and until everything was resolved, I would provide no guarantee of any kind for Seabrook. My father slammed his hand against a desk. What happens to the hotel? That's for you to solve. This hotel came from your grandfather. My grandfather left you a hotel. He did not leave you unlimited access to my life. My father's face turned red. You can really stand here and watch the family business fail? That question hurt, because I did not want the hotel to fail. The place held my childhood. My grandfather's photographs were still on the walls. Some employees had been there longer than I had been alive, so I did not choose the simplest answer. I did not walk away and wait for the bank to take the property. Instead, I offered one condition. My parents and Liam had to turn management over to an independent operating team for 18 months. All related party payments would be reviewed. Liam would lose financial approval authority. My father would stop treating the business bank accounts like personal accounts. If they agreed, I would help them find a restructuring firm. Not for free. I would not personally do the work, and I would not put in more money. I would simply connect them with professionals who could help save a business that still had value. My father said, "So you still get to control everything?" No. I looked at him. You finally don't. They did not agree immediately. My father refused to speak to me for 3 days, but the bank gave them 2 weeks. Without my condo, the Seabrook financing was dead. The old credit line was also being reviewed. Eventually, they signed. When the independent management team went in, they found something important. The hotel itself was not dying. The business was actually stronger than my father had claimed. The real problem was years of sloppy family spending. Company money paid for my father's vehicle. My mother submitted private event expenses for reimbursement. Liam's consulting company received questionable fees. None of the individual expenses looked catastrophic. Together, they added up to more than $170,000 a year. The Seabrook expansion should never have happened. The moment the project was canceled, the hotel's cash pressure dropped dramatically. North Tide was shut down. Liam sold the boat. The proceeds went back to the hotel. Then he started repaying me. My father struggled the most. He had spent decades believing Donovan House was his because his name was on the door. The first time the independent manager refused to reimburse a private golf trip, my father did not speak to anyone for the rest of the day. But something interesting happened. The hotel did not collapse. 6 months later, for the first time in years, it had a real cash reserve. Evan had to face consequences too. His law firm opened an internal review of the financing package. I did not ask them to destroy his career. I gave them the facts. Evan admitted that he had provided legal confirmation without verifying my actual consent. He lost the promotion to partner he had been expecting. Eventually, he left the firm. 3 months later, he asked to meet me. We met at a coffee shop. He looked thinner. He was not wearing a suit. His first words were, "I really thought I was helping you." I nodded. "I know. That's actually the part that scares me the most." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You didn't do it because you hated me. You did it because you believed you understood what was best for me better than I did." He sat quietly for a long time. "I thought if the hotel failed, you would regret it forever. That should have been my decision. I know you know now." "Yes." His voice was low. "I know now then," he said. "I still love you." Hearing it did not make me angry. It did not make me want him back either. It only made me sad. I loved you too. "Is there any chance for us?" I looked at him. "I want to ask you one question." "Okay. If the bank had never called me and the loan had funded and Seabrook had been successful, would you have come to me and told me that you helped use my condo?" Evan did not answer right away. "I already knew," eventually he said. "Probably not." I nodded. "Then there's nothing here to restart," he cried. I did not. Not because I was stronger, not because I was colder. The relationship had ended long before that conversation. It ended the moment he decided that a good result could justify skipping my consent. What surprised me was what happened with my career. After everything with Donovan House, I found myself wanting to leave the large consulting firm where I worked. I was tired of spending my days helping boards solve $100 million problems while ignoring how often financial control happens inside ordinary families. So I left. I opened a small restructuring and financial boundary practice. Most of my clients were family-owned businesses and companies run by married couples. I created one rule. If a case involved one family member using another person's credit, hidden guarantees, completely opaque marital finances, or anyone saying, "We're family, we don't need contracts," I required everything to be documented clearly before I would continue. My first year, I only had 8 clients. I made less money than I had at the big firm. I slept better. That was also how I met Nathan Brooks. He was 40, a hotel operations consultant. The bank brought him in as part of the independent team at Donovan House. I did not like him at first. During our first major meeting, he rejected one of my recommendations. I said, "You cannot cut winter employee hours by 20%. He said, "Then show me where you want the cash to come from." I remember thinking, this man is annoying later. I realized he was not trying to challenge me. He simply did not automatically agree with people. He did not agree with me because I was a Donovan. He did not agree with my father because he was older. He used the same standard with everyone: numbers, responsibility, results. We worked together for 9 months. Nothing happened between us. No flirting, no blurred lines. 3 months after the Donovan House project ended, he texted me, "Now that I'm no longer consulting for your family's business, would you like to have dinner without discussing cash flow?" I stared at the message and laughed. Then I wrote back, "Yes." On our first date, I was very direct. "I ended an engagement recently. I know. My family situation is complicated. I know that too. I will never fully merge my finances with another person." Nathan cut a piece of steak. "Okay." I waited. "That's all you're going to say?" "What else should I say?" "A lot of people would call that distrust." He shook his head. "I think adults having separate accounts is normal. Even if they're married? Even if they're married. What about real estate? Whoever owns the property should be clearly listed as the owner." I started laughing. "Are you giving me the perfect answer because you know my history?" He smiled. "Claire, I've worked in hotels for 20 years. I've seen too many marriages turn into accounting investigations. It was probably the least romantic thing anyone had ever said to me, and somehow it made me feel completely relaxed." Nathan and I moved slowly. He never solved my problems unless I clearly asked for help. One day, my mother called and told me my father had a health scare. I immediately slipped back into my old habits. I started looking at flights. I opened my banking app. I searched hospitals. Nathan was sitting nearby. He asked, "What exactly did your mother ask you to do?" I stopped. "What? Did she ask you to fly to Maine?" "No." "Did she ask you for money?" "No." "Did she ask you to call the doctor?" "No." "So what does she need?" I sat there. Then I realized my mother had only said, "Your dad has tests next week. I'm nervous." That was all. The old Claire would have taken over the entire situation. That day, I only told my mother, "Call me when you get the results." And then I let her handle the rest. It sounds small. It was not. It was the first time I understood that somebody else's anxiety did not automatically become my assignment. A year later, Donovan House was stable. My father regained some operating authority, but major spending still required financial review. Liam did not return as head of operations. He started again in event operations, regular salary, no company credit card, no North Tide, no boat. One day I visited the hotel and found him helping the staff move banquet tables. He looked embarrassed when he saw me. "Do you think I'm a failure now? Why would I? I used to be head of operations. You also didn't know what was happening in your own accounts. Now you make your payments on time. I'd call this version more successful." He stared at me, then he laughed. "You still know how to make people feel terrible. You still make it easy." That was the first time after everything happened that we sounded like a brother and sister again. Not a lender and a borrower, not a rescuer and a disaster, just siblings. My parents changed more slowly, especially my father. It took him more than a year to say, "I should not have used your competence to cover Liam's problems." My mother started therapy. Later, she told me she had always been terrified that if Liam experienced a serious failure, he would completely fall apart, so she kept removing consequences. I thought I was protecting him. She looked at me. "I trained you to take responsibility for everybody else instead." I did not say, "It's okay," because it was not magically okay because she apologized. I said, "Don't do it again." She nodded. "I won't." 2 years later, Nathan and I decided to get married. No hotel ballroom, no big event, no family business involved. We held the ceremony at a small botanical garden in Boston. 40-something guests. My mother asked me once, "Do you want us to help pay for the wedding?" I smiled. "No." She smiled too. "I thought you'd say that." My father did not interfere. Liam had one job. Before the ceremony, he gave me my grandfather's old watch, not as some grand family symbol. I had simply loved watching my grandfather wear it when I was a little girl. Nathan and I signed a prenup. Everything we owned before marriage stayed separate. Anything we chose to buy together later would be titled according to what each person contributed. Nobody treated that as proof we were not in love. After we signed, Nathan closed the folder and said, "Great. What do you want for dinner?" I laughed so hard I had tears in my eyes, because I thought about Evan. I thought about the $1.8 million loan. I thought about a time when someone believed love made signatures less important, and now the person who made me feel safest believed the exact opposite. Because we loved each other, every signature should be clear. Every choice should be real. Every yes should actually mean yes. At our wedding, Nathan did not promise to carry every burden for me. He said, "I will never decide what you are supposed to carry without asking you." When it was my turn, I said, "I used to think loving a family meant catching them every time they fell. Now I know sometimes love means letting an adult discover that the ground is real." People laughed. Liam laughed the loudest. I looked at him. He had made the final repayment to me 2 months before the wedding. The transfer memo said, "Paid in full. Thank you for finally saying no." I still have a screenshot of that payment, not because of the money, because it reminded me of something I had misunderstood for years. Every time I rescued Liam, I thought I was showing love. But if a person never experiences the cost of his own decisions, he never has to grow. And the same thing was true for me. As long as I confused "they need me" with "they love me," I never asked the more important question: do they respect me? People have asked me whether I hate Evan. I don't. Later, he sent me a short email. He said he had started therapy. He said he finally understood how often he had confused solving problems with love. He wrote, "I used to think being reliable meant handling things before someone had to ask. Now I understand that sometimes being reliable means waiting until she asks." I did not respond, but I hope he meant it. Not every apology is supposed to reopen a relationship. Sometimes the best thing an apology can do is stop someone from hurting the next person in the same way. I do not think my parents are completely bad people either. That matters. A family can love you and still create deeply unhealthy habits. A mother can honestly worry about her son and still hurt her daughter while trying to protect him. A father can genuinely love a family business and still use his daughter's ability as a resource because he is terrified of failure, understanding that complexity does not mean I have to accept the old pattern again. I can love my parents and still say no. I can go home for Christmas without paying Liam's taxes. I can care about my father's health without giving my family access to my bank accounts. I can listen to my mother complain about an expensive repair at the hotel and say, "Your finance manager will handle it." That is not cruelty. It is finally knowing where my life ends and theirs begins. I used to think being the most needed person in the family meant I was the most important. Now I hope they need me less. I hope my parents can manage their own money. I hope Liam can carry the weight of his own decisions. I hope my husband can face a problem without expecting me to solve every part of it. And I hope that when I am the one falling apart, I never again treat accepting help as a failure. Healthy relationships are not built around one person being strong forever while everyone else gets taken care of. They are built between adults who understand something simple: I can need you, but I cannot own you. I can ask you for help, but I cannot answer for you. I can hope you stay, but love does not give me permission to sign your name on a document you never saw. The $1.8 million Seabrook loan was never funded. The expansion was never built. The old version of me might have called that a failure. I do not anymore. Donovan House never became bigger, but it survived. My family lost a luxury project they could not afford and learned how to live on the revenue the hotel actually produced. Liam lost a boat and finally built a work history that belonged to him. I lost an engagement and later found a marriage that did not require me to surrender my right to choose. Sometimes losing a plan does not mean your life went wrong. Sometimes reality is simply stopping you before you spend even more time moving in the wrong direction. And the day my life truly changed was not the day I married Nathan. It was not the day I opened my own firm. It was not even the day my parents apologized. It was the morning I sat in my kitchen and stared at a document putting my home behind a loan I had never agreed to. The old version of me would have asked one question first: how do I save my family? That morning I asked something different. Why does everyone think they have the right to decide what I should sacrifice? That question changed everything. It took me from being the person who constantly cleaned up everyone else's disasters and gave me back a life that actually belonged to me. I finally understand this now. People who genuinely love you are allowed to need you. They are allowed to be disappointed. They are allowed to ask for help. They are even allowed to disagree with you completely. But if they know you may say no, they do not get to decide that asking you is optional, because love is not permanent access to another person's life, not family, not marriage, not anyone. Real love leaves room for your choice, and real growth begins when you finally believe your choices deserve to be respected by the people who say they love you.